friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Sea Friends, Sea Life, and Sea Sentiments. So I've stamped all the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my Mermaid's skin, and I'm using my go-to Caucasian combo, which is E000, E00, and E11. I'm pretty fair-skinned, so this kind of represents my own skin tone, but you can definitely change it up. I'm using the E11 first to lay in some shadows up under her hairline on the right side of her neck, since her hair is kind of swirling off to the side. Also on the underside of her arms, and then on the right side of her belly and up under her little bikini top as well. Again, because I figured her light source is more coming from the left just because of that hair swirling toward the right, like I said. So once I had my shadows laid in, I blended those out with the E00 and then used the E000 for the highlight. And then I'll also use these shades on the hermit crab's shell just to pull them in somewhere else in this scene. So I put the E11 up at the top of each separation and blended out with the E00 and then the E000. And then I'm going to add my rosy cheeks to my mermaid. I'm going to use R00, R11, and R20, starting with the R20, and then just going around that with the R11 and then the R00 to soften it into her skin tone. And I'm also going to use these shades for my little crab. So it's a little bit different doing a pink crab rather than a red crab. But I had a very specific color palette in mind for this card. So I decided to go with the lighter tones, and I think it actually turned out really cute. I'm also going to use these shades for the ribbon on that gift. And by the way, that gift is from a set called Christmas is Coming. I did forget to show that at the beginning, but I just needed a gift, so I just randomly grabbed the first one I came across in my stash. So I'm going to work on her hair now, and I wanted to make her a brunette. So I went with E53, E55, E57, and E59. Normally I would start a little bit lighter with maybe like the E51, but I decided to just skip straight to the E53 today and see how that went. So I'm mapping out where I eventually want my darkest shadows to go using that lightest tone. And then I'm going to get consequently darker with each marker and kind of just lay that in. I like to start light on the hair so that if I change my mind or make a mistake, I can cover it up, because I still haven't been coloring hair for all that long, at least not compared to the 11 years that I've been Copic coloring. I've maybe only been doing hair for maybe 3 or 4 years, and not really consistently until just maybe the last 2 years. So anyway, I still like to start lightest to darkest on hair and then work my way up to the darkest shade. So now I'm using that E57 to add some darker streaks at the roots of her hair and then also at the tips of her hair to give it a bit of movement in that center section. It's going to be the lightest in that area. And then I'm going to go in with my darkest shade, the E59, and deepen up those low lights even more. And then I thought I would skip over the E57 and go straight to my E55 to start to blend that out. And I couldn't quite figure out at first why these colors weren't really blending together until I realized I actually had the E53 in my hand. I had just picked up the wrong marker. So the E53 and the E59 are too far apart to really blend nicely together. So I've realized my mistake, but I also realized that I wanted some even lighter highlights in this hair. So I went ahead and grabbed the E51 before they get totally lost and added that in. And then I'm going to switch back to the E55 and start to pull out those E59 and E57 swipes on the end and try to connect them across the lighter sections of the hair. And I'm trying to follow the way that the hair is drawn with the way that I curve the darker strokes through them so that everything looks really consistent. So I'm just using those artist drawn lines, the little black lines that are kind of sectioning off the different areas of the hair and just following those curves and making additional ones of my own. And then once I have that done, I decided I needed to deepen up some of the streaks in the between areas. So now I'm going in with my second darkest shade, that E57, and just adding even more of those lowlights because she still wasn't looking quite as dark of a brunette as I wanted. So you can play around with it and kind of see how it goes. If you want to keep the hair a little bit lighter, you can leave it. If you want to make it a little bit darker, you can add in more layers and more darkness. And as long as you don't lose those highlights completely, you're still going to get a lot of movement and a lot of like shine in your hair with those lighter areas. So after that, I decided to let it dry back and see how it was going to look and if I wanted to make any more changes. And in the meantime, I added some spots to my hermit crab's shell. And I did end up doing a second layer off screen on the girl's hair. I would have filmed it, but my battery died and I didn't realize it until it was too late. So I just did a second layer of exactly what I had done to just deepen up her hair a little bit more. And then I moved on to the next combo, which I wanted to be a golden yellow. I went with Y13, YR21, and YR23. So the two YR shades are going to give me that really golden yellow shade. And then the Y13 I threw in there to brighten things up. And I did my Mermaid's bikini top, and then I'm doing these two angelfish type looking fish. I'm not exactly sure what they're called, maybe yellow tangs, I'm not sure. But anyway, I just put my shadows down at the bottom and then my highlights up at the top. And I'm also going to use them to do the little starfish over on the right hand side. And while I have those yellows out, I decided to also do the fins on this other fish and the tail and the little spots on the body. And I put the YR23 toward the back of each of those sections or the underside of the tail, and then blend it out with the YR21, and then use that Y13 up at the front to brighten things up, like I said. Next, I'm going to work on the mermaid's tail, and I wanted that to be kind of a dark, dusty teal. So I went with BG70, BG72, BG75, and BG78. So I'm laying in my shadows first with that BG78. This is pretty dark of a color, so I'm using it very sparingly on the edges of that tail. Adding a bit of shadow to the inside edge of the fin part, and then along the left hand side, because that's the side that kind of curves under, and then a little bit on her right hip because that tail and also her right arm would be casting a shadow down on that hip. And then I'm blending that out with the BG75. So just pulling that color out a bit more and softening that up. And then I'll come in with the BG72 and bring that color in a little bit further. And I saved some room for the BG70. I did a little bit on the top edges of the fins around her waist, and then I'll bring in that BG70. Now the BG70 is a super pale marker. I think it's probably one of the lightest shades of Copic's. It's a barely there shade. It's perfect for like fairy wings or bees wings or whatever, but I wanted to use it in this tail combo, but it's so much lighter than the BG72 that I had to do a little bit of tip to tip action, and I should have given it some time for the cardstock to dry in between. I worked that cardstock a little bit too hard, and I ended up having some bleeding on the left hand side. So to fix that, I'm just going to take a white gel pen and color right over that, and nobody else but you guys will ever know. I'm also going to use these shades to color in the kelp, but I'm starting with the BG75 and adding some shading at the tip and also the stem of each leaf. And then on the one that's kind of twisted, I also added it in the section where it's bent. And then I'm blending out with the BG72, just pulling that color in toward the center of each leaf. And then I'm going to switch to the BG70 to pull that color together. It's not going to be a perfect blend once again, but rather than work over it too much, I decided to kind of go with it and just add some stripes to my plant. So once I have everything nicely blended, I'm going to go back in with the BG75 and just do like little zigzag close together, kind of like almost like a snake plant. If you guys have one of those, you might know what I'm talking about. I have one. So I just went over that with some horizontal stripes, and then I'm going to add a touch of the BG78 in the middle of those stripes as well to deepen those up and just kind of draw your eye even more to those. I also wanted to use these shades on the back stripe on those yellow fish, but I'm just using the BG72 and then the BG70, and then I added a touch more of the BG72 down at the bottom for an extra layer of depth. And then I'm going to switch to an orange combo. I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18 to do the front stripe of each of those fish. And this is kind of like a deeper, more dusty orange combo. It's not as bright as some of the combos you could use, and that's why I chose it, because it kind of goes with the dusty teal and that golden yellow. It just has almost like a fall vibe, even though I'm not going for a fall card, because I guess mermaids can live under the water in the fall, but I just don't really normally see seasons happen underwater. But anyway, it kind of has a fall color palette even so, but it's just something that I caught my eye and I wanted to try to capture for this card. So the other plant I decided to also do in orange, so it's a little pop of something unexpected. So I colored each leaf with the YR12 and then added a little bit of that YR14 in there close to the stem, and then deepened that up with a little touch of that YR18 as well. And then I'm going to switch to some dusty blues. So I'm going to use B91, B93, B95, and B97 for my dolphin. Incidentally, this is also my favorite combo for jeans, but I think it looks really cute on the dolphin, and it's something different than the typical just gray. So I'm going to use that B97 to lay in some shadows, mainly on the underside of the body, but I did add a little bit to the top in a very thin line just to accentuate those curves, especially behind the dorsal fin where that would be casting a shadow. And then on the tip of the head. Then I'm going to blend that out with the B95. I'm still keeping these darkest shades really close to the outside edges so that he won't get too dark. And then I'm going to come in with that B93 and begin to pull that color out even more, catching the edge of that B95 and pulling those darker shades into the lighter area, but still leaving the vast majority of the body for the lightest shade, which is going to be the B91. So I'm going to fill in all the rest of him, just using those little circular scribble motions to break up the edge of that B91 so I don't get harsh lines, and just smooth over everything. And I did also do a second layer on him off screen to just smooth out that blend even more. And then I'm also going to use these shades for the gift. I'm starting with the B95 on that because I want to add some detail that I really want to pop. So I wanted to keep the gift more light and so I use the B95 and then the B93 and then the B91 at the top. And I am going to do a second layer of that because I felt like the B95 kind of got lost at the bottom there. And then once I have my second layer on there, I'm going to let that dry for a couple of seconds and then add in some polka dots with the B99. I'm just being very careful and using the tip of that marker to add thin little dots in like a diagonal pattern. And I think that just gives it a nice pop. It's something extra that makes it look a little bit more like gift wrap. Then I'm going to switch to some cool grays. I'm going to use C0, C1, C3, and C5 to color this large rock. So I started with the C5 and then I'm going to start blending that out with the C3. And since it is a rock and it has that rougher texture, I'm purposely not blending it out perfectly smooth and using the C1 as the lightest for that. And then I'm going to switch to the C3 for my darkest for that clamshell at the top. Blend that out with the C1 and then the C0 on the edges, and also use the C0 for the shading on the underside of the dolphin's belly. Then I went to my R20 again and added in R22 to do some cheeks on all of my fish and my crab. I went with the darker shade because they all were more darkly colored, so I really wanted it to stand out. And then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that started and went over the eyes of all of my critters and my mermaid to make them bright and shiny. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I've cut 2 pieces of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock with the Nesting Decal A2 dies, and then the smaller one I also used the Hill and Dale die for the top. And I'm going to color these with some Distress Oxide ink. For the sand, I'm using Antique Linen, and then I'm going to darken that up with some Gathered Twigs. And I'm making sure that the top edge is the darkest, and then it's kind of fading almost toward white at the bottom. I'll go back to my Antique Linen blending tool to smooth out the transition between those shades. And then I also wanted to do some splatter, so I'm going to press some of both of those inks onto an acrylic block, add a little bit of water to them, and mix that up to make it more fluid. And then I'm going to tap that off the side with a paintbrush so I get a nice little bit of speckle detail. It's going to help it look like sand. So I did the Antique Linen first, and then I'm also doing some of the Gathered Twigs. And then I will set this piece aside to dry, clean up my work surface, and then move on to my background. I'm going to use some speckled egg in the center. This color reminds me a lot of the BG70 marker, so I think it's a really good match for that. And then I want to deepen up the edges with Evergreen Bough. So I'm going to bring in some more of those like greenish shades that are in like the BG72 and the BG75. So I'm going to add that to the outside edges. I'm not worried about the bottom because it's going to be covered up by the sand. And then I just went back to the speckled egg to kind of smooth out the transitions. And then to deepen that up even further on the edges and really highlight that decal detail, I'm going to add in some pine needles. So I'm going to really lay that ink on pretty heavily on those outside edges. Like I said, I really want your eye to be drawn to that detail that I love so much. And then I'll go back to the Evergreen Bough and pull that into the center, and then back to the speckled egg to finish that off. And then I also wanted some splatter detail on the background of this so that it would kind of look like bubbles. I'm just going to do the lightest and the darkest though. So I'm doing the speckled egg and the pine needles. And I'm going to tap that all over the background as well. Just getting those nice little fine dots with that thin paintbrush. And by tapping it off the edge of the block, I also get a lot more control. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to bring in both of these pieces because I also wanted to add some gold detail. I'm actually using this copper color that is in my Gansai Tambi Starry colors, and I'm going to splatter that all over both pieces so it'll kind of just pull the whole thing together. And I thought that copper just really went well with the deeper oranges and the golden yellows in the coloring. So once I have these dried, I'm going to glue the sand down to the bottom of my scene, just matching up that deckled edge with the background piece. And then I'll pop that in my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm stamping out birthday fishes from the Sea Sentiments stamp set. The stamp set has so many great punny sentiments that go perfectly with these mermaid and the fish stamp sets, the Sea Life and the Sea Friends. So I did birthday fishes on the outside of the card, and then I'm going to do an insert for the inside of the card. I'm going to stamp in Rainforest ink from Lawn Fawn. I'm going to use another one of the Sea Sentiments that says "You are fantastic," and then the fish are from that set as well. And then I'll set that aside to dry, and then I can assemble all of these pieces. I'm going to glue the insert into a rainforest card base. So that is cardstock from Lawn Fawn that I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. And then I've popped the background piece up with foam tape. So I'm going to just smooth out that crease with my Teflon bone folder and then pop that on the card front. And then I'll bring in my images, and I want to lay out my mermaid and my dolphin before I adhere them because I know that they need to go right around that sentiment, and I also wanted to make room in her hand for the gift and make sure it wasn't going to cover up the sentiment. So I just laid those out and made sure I knew where I wanted those to go before adhering them down. And then I can grab my Barely Art Precision craft glue and get them adhered permanently. This glue dries really fast. I love it. I really love that super fine nozzle, but it dries super fast. So I've gotten in the habit of kind of laying out my images before adhering them. And when I don't take that step, I often live to regret it. So yeah, it's just a good idea to kind of make sure you know exactly where you want things to go. Placing that gift so that it's right on her open palm, so it looks like she's holding it up to the recipient. And then I'm going to make a nice little cluster down in the bottom right corner with this rock and the plants, tucking the orange plant behind the rock, and then the green plant I'm going to add in front of it over on the left of it, more towards the center of the card. And then I wanted my little hermit crab to kind of be sitting up on the rock. And then I also have the yellow starfish that I'm going to add down in the bottom right corner. And then I have this orange fish that's also going to be swimming down toward the bottom of the scene right under the mermaid. And one of the yellow fish is going to be swimming alongside. So these guys are buddies. And then below them, I'm going to add the clamshell to balance out the starfish. And then I have the yellow fish that's swimming the opposite direction that I'm going to put in the top right corner. I wanted to fill in some of the background, so I'm taking some Noble Fur ink from Lawn Fawn and taking the fish silhouette image and just stamping that in the background behind the mermaid and the fish in the scene. It probably would have been a good idea to do this before I added the foam tape so that it was just a little bit more firm underneath it, but I wanted to make sure that I had them kind of placed around my fish, so I kind of had to do it after. It worked out just fine though. They stamped out pretty well. A couple of times I had to stamp over top, but didn't mess up too bad. So I just kind of filled in here and there until I liked the way it was looking. And then the only thing left was to add a bit of glitter. Gotta have glitter on a mermaid card, especially on her tail. You've got to have those little sparkly fish scales, right? So I grabbed my favorite Stardust Stickles And I'm adding that to like the darkest parts of the shading on her tail, just squirting out a little bit at a time and then using the nozzle to kind of swirl that around and get a nice thin layer exactly where I want it to go. I also added it to the ribbon on the gift and to the stripes on the 2 yellow fish. Then I'm going to put it on the fins of the orange fish and on his tail and also on the starfish. And then I decided to add a little to the bikini top on my mermaid and also just a touch to the orange plant, just right at the darkest part close to the stem. And that is going to finish up this card, so I will lift that up so you can see all of that sparkle from the stickles and the starry colors. And I'll also give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun playing with these mermaids again. So if you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel so you never miss a video, and ring that notification bell as well. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a great time. Bye-bye.